So Jay-Z's name just showed up in the Epstein files, and the internet is losing its mind. Let me tell you what actually happened here because the headlines are doing exactly what they always do, leaving out the most important parts. On January 20th, the Department of Justice dropped the biggest batch of Epstein documents yet. 3 million documents, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. This is the largest release since Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and buried in all of that material, you've got names, big names, Jay-Z, Pusha T, Harvey Weinstein, and immediately people start connecting dots that don't exist. So let's talk about what this actually means, what it doesn't mean, and why understanding the difference matters more than you think. First thing you need to know, these names didn't come from Epstein's personal records. They didn't come from corroborated law enforcement reports. They came from a tip, an anonymous tip to the FBI that was archived as part of the investigation. And here's what nobody's talking about. An FBI tip is not an investigation. It's not evidence. It's information that came in that got logged. The FBI gets thousands of tips. Some are credible, some are completely baseless, some are from people with genuine trauma trying to piece together fragmented memories, some are from people with agendas. The point is, a tip existing in a file doesn't tell you anything except that someone said something to the FBI at some point. Now let's get into what this specific tip actually said. According to an FBI crisis intake report, an anonymous victim alleged she'd been drugged and sexually abused over several instances across multiple years. In her account, she named Pusha T. Terrence LeVar Thornton as one of her handlers. The report describes handlers as people who established friendships with victims and were involved in drugging them. Then separately, this same person said she once woke up in a room with Harvey Weinstein and Jay-Z present. But here's the critical detail that's getting buried. The report itself states that because the victim was allegedly drugged in both scenarios, her memory was clouded. That's in the official document. Her memory was clouded. Now, I'm not saying that to dismiss anyone's trauma. Sexual abuse is real. Drugging is real. Memory issues from trauma are real. But when we're talking about public figures and accusations that could destroy lives and careers, we have to be precise about what we actually know versus what we're speculating about. And what we know is this: an anonymous person gave a tip to the FBI where they named these individuals, and that person's own account acknowledges their memory was compromised. That's it. That's what we have. The tip also mentioned that this person believed they had additional information about other people involved and information related to racketeering in support of trafficking. They also believed they were under surveillance and being stalked by people involved in the abuse. Now, think about what that means. This is someone who's describing an incredibly complex, ongoing situation, someone who feels they're being actively monitored, someone who's trying to make sense of fragmented memories while believing they're in danger. That doesn't make them a liar, but it does make their account one that would require serious investigation and corroboration before you start pointing fingers at specific people. And here's the thing. There's no indication any investigation into Jay-Z, Pusha T, or even Harvey Weinstein happened based on this tip. The document itself makes clear that the tip doesn't imply these individuals were investigated. It doesn't imply guilt. It's literally just a record that someone said something. And this is important because we've seen this pattern before with these Epstein file releases. Names come out, photos surface, and people assume that being in the files means you did something wrong. But we already know from previous releases that Epstein associated with hundreds of people across entertainment, politics, business. He was a financier who cultivated relationships with powerful people. Being photographed with him at an event doesn't make you a criminal. Being mentioned in an unverified tip doesn't make you a criminal. The first batch of Epstein files dropped back in December, and it included photos of Bill Clinton, Mick Jagger, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, all people who at various points crossed paths with Epstein. Some of those associations we understand, some we don't. Some are completely innocent networking at industry events. Some might be more complicated. But the photos themselves, undated and without context, don't tell us which is which. And multiple people named in previous releases have denied any wrongdoing, and there's been no evidence presented to contradict those denials. So, why does this matter? Why am I spending so much time on the distinction between a tip and evidence? Because we live in an age where information moves faster than context. A headline that says Jay-Z named in Epstein files is technically true, but it's also designed to make you think something that isn't supported by the facts. It's designed to make you fill in the blanks with the worst possible scenario. And once that association is made in people's minds, it's almost impossible to undo. That's how reputations get destroyed. That's how careers actually do end. Not because someone did something wrong, but because millions of people saw a headline and made an assumption. Now, let's talk about Harvey Weinstein specifically for a second, because his inclusion in this is interesting. Weinstein is already a convicted sexual predator. He's already in prison. His crimes are documented, prosecuted, proven. So when his name shows up in this tip alongside Jay-Z and Pusha T, it does something psychologically. It creates guilt by association. Your brain sees Weinstein's name and thinks, okay, this is credible because we know Weinstein is capable of this. But that's not how evidence works. Weinstein being a predator doesn't mean everyone mentioned in the same sentence as him is also a predator. That's the association fallacy, and it's exactly what makes these kinds of releases so dangerous when they're reported irresponsibly. Here's something else worth considering. This tip was filed in 2019. Epstein was arrested in July of that year. He died in August. The FBI has had this information for almost 7 years now. If there was anything here that warranted investigation, if there was any corroborating evidence, if there was anything beyond this single anonymous tip, we would know by now. The fact that we're only seeing this now as part of a massive document dump, not as part of an active investigation or charges, tells you something. It tells you this was logged, reviewed, and apparently didn't lead anywhere. Now, I want to be really clear about something. I'm not saying the FBI always gets it right. I'm not saying every tip that doesn't lead to charges is false. Sometimes investigations don't move forward because of lack of resources. Sometimes witnesses are scared. Sometimes evidence is difficult to obtain. Sometimes powerful people have ways of making things go away. All of that is true. But when we're talking about public accusations against specific individuals, we have a responsibility to be accurate about what we actually know. And what we know here is extremely limited. The document also reveals something about how these investigations work. The partially redacted file shows that the FBI took this tip seriously enough to create a crisis intake report. They documented it, they logged the names, they preserved the information as part of the larger Epstein investigation. That's standard procedure. That's what they're supposed to do. But documenting a tip is different from verifying a tip, and verification is what matters. Think about it from another angle. If you were famous and someone filed an anonymous tip with the FBI claiming you were involved in something horrific, and that tip was based on clouded memories from alleged drugging, and there was no other evidence and no investigation followed, would you want that tip released to the public? Would you want millions of people seeing your name associated with those allegations with no context? Because that's what's happening here. These are real people. They have families, they have careers, they have reputations, and those things can be destroyed by association alone, regardless of truth. Reps for Jay-Z and Pusha T haven't commented yet as of the reporting on this, which makes sense. What do you even say to something like this? Denying it makes it a bigger story. Ignoring it looks suspicious to some people. There's no good move when you're responding to an allegation that was never investigated and doesn't have evidence behind it. You're basically being asked to prove a negative. You're being asked to prove something didn't happen based on someone's clouded memory from 7 years ago. That's an impossible position to be in. And this brings me to the bigger picture here. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed with bipartisan support because people wanted answers. They wanted to know who was involved in Epstein's crimes. They wanted accountability for everyone who enabled him or participated in the abuse he orchestrated. That's completely legitimate. Victims deserve justice. The public deserves to know the truth. But transparency without context isn't truth. It's just noise. And when you release millions of documents, thousands of videos, hundreds of thousands of images all at once with minimal redaction and no explanatory framework, you're not really serving transparency. You're creating chaos. The Department of Justice said they made all reasonable efforts to review and redact personal information pertaining to victims and other private individuals. But clearly, some names made it through. And once they're out there, once they're in headlines, once they're trending on social media, the damage is done. You can't unring that bell. You can't put context back into information that's already been consumed without it. Here's what I think is really happening with these releases. There's enormous public pressure to reveal everything about Epstein. Politicians on both sides saw an opportunity to look tough on trafficking and corruption. Trump signed this act into law back in November. The DOJ has been racing to meet deadlines while processing an absolutely massive amount of material. And in that rush, nuance gets lost. The difference between an investigated claim and an uninvestigated tip gets lost. The difference between being photographed at an event and being involved in crimes gets lost. Everything becomes named in the Epstein files as if that phrase means one thing when it actually means 100 different things depending on context. And let's be honest about the media's role in this too. A headline that says Jay-Z named in Epstein files gets clicks. A headline that says Jay-Z mentioned in unverified FBI tip with no investigation or corroborating evidence is more accurate but less sensational. So which one do you think gets published? Which one drives traffic? Which one gets shared? The incentive structure is completely backwards. Accuracy should be rewarded, but instead sensationalism is what performs, and real people's lives get caught in that machinery. Now, some of you might be thinking, where there's smoke, there's fire. If someone filed a tip naming these people, maybe there's something to it. And look, I understand that instinct, but that's not how justice works. That's not how truth works. Smoke can come from a lot of places. It can come from genuine trauma that's been misattributed. It can come from confusion. It can come from someone with an agenda. It can come from mental illness. It can come from 100 different sources that have nothing to do with the people being named. You need actual evidence. You need corroboration. You need investigation. You need due process. And this is especially important when we're talking about sexual abuse allegations because those allegations are so serious and so damaging. Real victims deserve to be believed and supported and given every resource to pursue justice. But believing victims doesn't mean abandoning standards of evidence. It doesn't mean every accusation is automatically true regardless of circumstances. It means taking claims seriously, investigating them thoroughly, and making determinations based on facts. That's what protects both victims and the accused. That's what allows the system to function. What we have here with this Epstein file release is something that doesn't fit neatly into either category. It's not nothing. Someone did make these claims to the FBI, but it's also not evidence. There's no investigation, no corroboration, no charges, no trial. It exists in this weird middle space where it's public information but not public evidence. And we as a society don't really have good frameworks for how to handle that kind of information responsibly. So where does this leave us? Jay-Z's career isn't over. Pusha T's career isn't over. Being named in an unverified tip doesn't end careers, at least not on its own. But it does create doubt. It does create association. It does give ammunition to people who already didn't like these artists or wanted to see them brought down for other reasons. And that's the insidious part. The truth is complicated and requires attention and nuance. The lie is simple and spreads faster. If you take nothing else from this, take this. When you see a name in the Epstein files, before you jump to conclusions, ask yourself what kind of connection it actually is. Is it a photo at a public event? Is it an email about something unrelated? Is it an unverified tip? Is it actual evidence from an investigation? Those things are not the same. They don't carry the same weight. They don't mean the same things. And treating them as if they do is how innocent people get destroyed and how actual criminals hide in the noise. The Epstein case matters. Getting justice for victims matters. Holding powerful people accountable matters. But accuracy matters too. Truth matters too. And right now, in this specific instance, what we have is a tip, not truth. That might change if more information comes out. That might change if investigations happen. But as of right now, based on what's actually been released, there's no there, just a name in a file and a lot of people willing to believe the worst without evidence. That's what actually happened. That's what the files actually say. Everything else is speculation.